There is a fighter jet flying over the Middle East right now that the United States Air Force has never fully seen the data on. Not the radar cross-section data, not the electronic warfare suite specifics, not the full sensor fusion architecture. And here is the part that should make you stop and think. The country flying that jet is one of America's closest allies. It has received billions in U.S. military aid. It operates American-built aircraft. It trains alongside American pilots. And yet, when it comes to this particular program, this particular machine, they have looked the United States government in the eye and said, "No, you do not get that information." That jet is the IAI Lavi's descendant in spirit. The Elbit and IAI influence technologies baked into a platform called the F-35 Iadir, combined with indigenous systems so advanced that American engineers who have worked alongside Israeli counterparts have come back saying things they are not supposed to say publicly. And beyond even that, Israel is now developing something that goes further still, a sixth-generation concept, a loyal wingman drone program, directed energy systems, and a domestic fighter ecosystem that is quietly repositioning one of the smallest countries on Earth as one of the most sophisticated aerospace powers in human history. This is not a story about betrayal. This is not a story about ingratitude. This is a story about a nation that decided, after one of the most painful lessons in modern military history, that it would never again depend entirely on someone else for its survival in the sky. And the decisions that came from that moment have produced technology that even the country that helped create it is not allowed to fully examine. Stay with me, because by the end of this, the way you think about air power, alliances, and the future of aerial warfare will be fundamentally different. And if you find stories like this one important, subscribe right now so you never miss one. Before we get into what Israel is building today, you have to understand where this story actually starts, because it does not start in a laboratory. It starts in a moment of pure existential terror at 30,000 feet, October 1973. The Yom Kippur War. Egypt and Syria launch a coordinated surprise attack on Israel on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Israeli forces are caught off guard. In the first days of the war, the Israeli Air Force, which had been the decisive instrument of victory in 1967, runs directly into a wall of Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missiles. Pilots who had spent years training for aerial dogfights suddenly found themselves flying into corridors of radar-guided death that their American-supplied aircraft and American-supplied electronic warfare systems could not adequately handle. The losses were staggering. In less than 3 weeks of fighting, Israel lost over 100 aircraft. For a country with a total air force of only a few hundred jets, that was catastrophic. And here is the lesson that burned itself into the Israeli defense establishment's institutional memory so deeply that it still shapes every decision made today. American weapons, even the best American weapons, were not designed specifically for Israel's threat environment. They were designed for American priorities, American doctrine, American geography. Israel's geography is unique. Israel's threat environment is unique. The distances are tiny. The response times are measured in seconds, not minutes. The adversaries are different. The electronic warfare landscape is different. And when American politicians decided what technology Israel would and would not receive, those decisions were made in Washington, not in Tel Aviv. That dependence, that vulnerability, the idea that Israel's survival in the sky could be constrained by the political winds of a foreign capital, became the driving force behind everything that followed. And what followed was one of the most ambitious, most controversial, and most consequential indigenous fighter programs ever attempted by a small nation. The Lavi. Say that name to anyone who spent time in the Israeli aerospace industry in the 1980s and watch their expression change. The Lavi, which means young lion in Hebrew, was supposed to be Israel's answer to everything that the Yom Kippur War had exposed. It was a domestically designed and built fighter jet, conceived in the late 1970s, developed through the early 1980s, and by 1986, actually flying. And it was not just flying, it was impressive. The Lavi was a canard delta wing design. It incorporated composite materials that were cutting edge for the time. It had a fly-by-wire flight control system. It was designed from the ground up for the specific missions Israeli pilots needed to fly. Low-altitude strike, tight maneuvering over small geographic spaces, survivability in a dense surface-to-air missile environment. American engineers who saw it up close were not dismissive. Some were genuinely alarmed, because here was a small country with a fraction of America's defense budget building a fighter that, in certain mission profiles, looked like it could match or exceed what American manufacturers were producing at the time. Israel Aircraft Industries, the state-owned aerospace company that is today known as IAI, was pouring its best engineering talent into this program. Raphael and Elbit were contributing weapons and avionics systems. The Israeli Air Force was shaping the requirements with a precision that only comes from pilots who have actually been shot at with the weapons they are designing against. The Lavi was real, it was sophisticated, and it terrified American aerospace contractors. Because the Lavi was partly funded with American military aid money, and those American contractors saw what was coming. If Israel built its own jet, it would not buy American jets. And if Israel did not buy American jets, and if Israel then sold its Lavi to other countries, which it almost certainly would have, because Israel's defense industry has always needed export revenue to survive, then American manufacturers were looking at a serious competitor built partially on American dollars. What happened next is one of the most debated chapters in the history of American-Israeli relations. The United States government applied pressure, significant pressure. The argument made publicly was financial. The Lavi was going over budget. It was consuming enormous resources. Israel's economy could not sustain it. The American aid money was supposed to bolster Israeli security, not fund a competitor to American industry. Behind the scenes, the pressure was considerably less polite. In 1987, after years of debate, political struggle, and genuine anguish inside Israel's defense and political establishment, the Israeli government voted to cancel the Lavi. The margin was razor thin. It was not a consensus decision. It was a wound, and the people who had spent years building that airplane, who believed in it, who had given pieces of their professional lives to it, did not forget. The engineers did not forget. The pilots did not forget. The defense officials who had argued for it and lost did not forget. And the institutional lesson of the Lavi cancellation echoed forward through every subsequent Israeli defense decision. If you build something extraordinary, and you depend on foreign approval to keep building it, you are not sovereign. You are a client, and clients can be managed. Israel decided, in the wake of the Lavi, that it would never again allow itself to be purely a client. It would buy foreign aircraft when necessary. It would maintain alliances. It would cooperate on joint programs. But it would also build, domestically, the capabilities that no foreign government could take away. And the technologies developed for the Lavi did not disappear when the program ended. They went somewhere. Some of them went to China, which is a story with its own enormous geopolitical consequences that still reverberates today. But many of them stayed inside Israel's defense industrial complex, quietly maturing, quietly advancing, waiting for the next platform to absorb them. That platform eventually became the foundation of what Israel has done to the F-35. And what Israel has done to the F-35 is something that deserves its own conversation, because it is unlike anything any other operator of that aircraft has been permitted to do. When the United States developed the F-35 Lightning II, it was designed as a fifth-generation multi-role stealth fighter that would be sold to allies and partners around the world. The program involved over a dozen partner nations, countries like the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Norway, the Netherlands, Denmark, Italy, and Japan all became F-35 operators. And in virtually every case, those countries fly the F-35 in a configuration that Lockheed Martin and the U.S. government can monitor, update, and control. Software updates come from the United States. The mission data files, the databases that tell the jet what threats to expect and how to respond to them, are provided and controlled by the United States. The supply chain runs through American systems. For most F-35 operators, this is a trade-off they accept. The jet is extraordinary, and the integration into a U.S.-led alliance structure is part of the point. But Israel did not accept that trade-off. Not entirely. When Israel negotiated its F-35 purchase, it negotiated something no other country received: the right to integrate its own systems. Its own electronic warfare suite, its own weapons, its own mission computers, to a degree that no other F-35 operator was granted. The Israeli variant of the F-35 is designated the F-35I, with the I standing for Israel. The nickname is Adir, which means mighty or awesome in Hebrew. And the Adir is not just an F-35 with a different paint scheme. It is a fundamentally different aircraft in terms of the systems it carries and the data it generates. Israel integrated its own electronic warfare systems, developed primarily by Elbit Systems, into the Adir. These are not American electronic warfare systems. They are Israeli systems, built on Israeli research, incorporating Israeli-developed algorithms and threat libraries that reflect Israel's specific operational environment, the specific radar frequencies used by Syrian air defense, Iranian-supplied missile systems, Hezbollah's evolving electronic order of battle, threats that American systems are not optimized against because American systems are optimized for American threat environments. Israel also integrated its own weapons, the Python 5 air-to-air missile, the Spice family of precision-guided bombs, weapons that are not part of the standard F-35 weapons inventory that any other operator can access. And here is the critical part that explains why the United States does not have full visibility into the Adir's capabilities. The data generated by those Israeli systems, the electronic warfare receivers picking up signals in the electromagnetic spectrum, the threat libraries those systems are built on, the sensor fusion data that combines all of those inputs into a single integrated picture for the pilot, that data belongs to Israel. Not to Lockheed Martin, not to the U.S. Air Force, not to the Pentagon. Israel. When an Adir pilot flies a mission and the aircraft systems collect electronic intelligence, map radar emissions, characterize new threats, that data goes into Israeli databases that American analysts do not have access to. And from an American perspective, this creates an interesting and somewhat uncomfortable situation. The F-35 was designed as a networked platform. It was designed to share data across the kill chain, to connect with other aircraft, with ground systems, with naval vessels, to function as a node in a broader networked battle management system. The Adir can participate in that network, but the Israelis control what goes in and what comes out. They decide what they share, they decide what they keep, and what they keep is considerable. American defense officials have acknowledged this dynamic in careful, diplomatic language. Israeli officials have acknowledged it in slightly more direct language. The unofficial Israeli position, expressed through various channels over the years, is something like this. We have an alliance, we value that alliance. We cooperate on an enormous range of military activities. But the specific operational data generated by our systems, the intelligence picture our pilots are building every time they fly, the electronic signatures our sensors are capturing, that is ours. Because that intelligence picture is the foundation of our operational security. And operational security in Israel's environment is not an abstraction. It is the difference between pilots coming home and pilots not coming home. To understand why Israel holds this position so firmly, you have to understand what the Israeli Air Force actually does on a regular basis, that most Western air forces do not. Israel has been conducting what the military community calls the campaign between the wars for over a decade. It is a sustained operation, primarily conducted by the Israeli Air Force, to prevent the transfer of advanced weapons from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon. This campaign involves hundreds of airstrikes, many of them conducted deep inside Syrian territory, against targets that include weapons convoys, storage facilities, manufacturing sites, and in some cases, Iranian military advisors and commanders. This is not a hypothetical or a training exercise. This is real combat, conducted regularly, against adversaries who are actively trying to understand Israeli tactics, Israeli timing, Israeli electronic signatures, Israeli methods. Every piece of data about how Israeli aircraft operate, what frequencies they use, what approach profiles they fly, what electronic warfare techniques they employ, is potentially intelligence that adversaries can use to kill Israeli pilots. The idea of sharing that data with a large bureaucratic alliance structure, where it might pass through dozens of hands and hundreds of computer systems before reaching its final destination, is not something the Israeli Air Force is willing to contemplate. And frankly, from a pure operational security standpoint, it is hard to argue with their logic, but the Adir is only one part of the picture. Because while Israel has been modifying the F-35 in ways that make it uniquely capable in Israel's operational environment, it has also been building something else. Something that does not depend on American approval at all. The Israeli Air Force has publicly acknowledged that it is pursuing a next-generation aviation ecosystem, and the scale of what that means when you start to examine the components is genuinely striking. Start with the Harop. The Harop is an Israeli-developed loitering munition, what many people call a kamikaze drone, built by IAI. It is launched from a container, it flies to a target area, it searches for radar emissions, and when it finds an active radar, it dives into it at high speed and destroys it. The Harop has been sold to multiple countries and has been used in actual combat, most notably by Azerbaijan against Armenian air defenses in the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War, where it proved devastatingly effective. This is not a prototype. This is a combat-proven system that Israel built, sells, and continues to develop further generations of. Now pair the Harop with the Harop's successors, which IAI has not fully disclosed, but which are known to be under development, and you begin to see an architecture. Israel is building an ecosystem of unmanned systems that can operate ahead of, around, and in coordination with manned aircraft to suppress enemy air defenses, gather intelligence, conduct electronic warfare, and strike targets, all without putting a human pilot at risk. This is the loyal wingman concept that the United States Air Force is also pursuing with its Collaborative Combat Aircraft program, and that Australia is developing with the Boeing MQ-28 Ghost Bat. But Israel has been working on variants of this concept longer than most people realize, and with a level of operational experience that no other country can match, because Israel has been flying unmanned combat systems in real threat environments continuously for decades. The Heron family of unmanned aerial vehicles, the Hermes series from Elbit, the Skylark tactical drones. These are not just reconnaissance platforms. They are the foundation of an operational culture that treats unmanned systems as full participants in the air battle, rather than as accessories to manned aviation. And Israel's experience integrating those systems into real operations, coordinating them with manned fighters, using them to build the intelligence picture that keeps pilots alive, is data that no amount of theoretical research can replace. Now add to that the directed energy dimension. Israel's Iron Beam system, developed by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, is a high-energy laser weapon designed to intercept rockets, artillery shells, mortars, and drones. It is not a science fiction concept. It has been demonstrated, it is being fielded, and the implications for aerial warfare are significant, because the technologies that enable a ground-based directed energy system to track and destroy a fast-moving small target are directly related to the technologies that would enable an airborne directed energy system to do the same thing from a fighter jet. The United States has been working on airborne laser programs for years with mixed results. Israel's approach has been different. Rather than trying to build an airborne laser powerful enough to destroy large threats at long range, which requires enormous power generation that is extremely difficult to fit inside an aircraft, Israel has focused on developing the tracking algorithms, the atmospheric compensation techniques, and the power management systems that make directed energy work in the real world, and then scaling those capabilities incrementally as the underlying technology matures. This is a patient, methodical, engineering-driven approach, and it is producing results. But the centerpiece of what Israel is building for the future of its air power goes beyond individual systems. It is an integrated concept that the Israeli Air Force has been developing under various names and frameworks over the past decade, sometimes called the Digital Army, sometimes framed within the broader multi-year transformation plans that the Israeli military cycles through. The core idea is this: future air warfare will not be won by the single best fighter jet. It will be won by the side that best integrates manned and unmanned assets, electronic warfare, data networks, artificial intelligence-driven decision support, and precision weapons into a coherent, adaptive, fast-moving system that can operate at machine speed faster than any human adversary can respond. Israel has been building toward that concept with a consistency and a seriousness of purpose that is genuinely impressive when you lay out the components. And the sixth-generation fighter question, the natural follow-on to what comes after the F-35, brings all of these threads together. Israel has not publicly announced a sixth-generation manned fighter program in the same way that the United States has announced NEGAD, the next-generation air dominance program, or the way that the United Kingdom, Italy, and Japan have announced the Global Combat Air Program, known as GCAP. But the absence of a formal announcement does not mean the absence of thinking, planning, and foundational work. IAI has published conceptual materials. Elbit has discussed future manned-unmanned teaming architectures. Rafael has talked about future weapon system integration concepts. And Israeli Air Force leadership has spoken publicly about the need to maintain qualitative superiority in the air domain against threats that are themselves becoming more sophisticated at a pace that historical assumptions about Israeli air dominance cannot take for granted. Iran's drone program. The spread of advanced Russian-supplied air defense systems like the S-300 and S-400 to regional actors. The possibility that adversaries are learning from every Israeli operation, studying the electronic signatures, adapting their tactics, developing countermeasures. All of these pressures are pushing Israel toward a next-generation aviation concept that goes beyond anything currently in service. And the key question for the United States, and for the broader Western alliance, is what role, if any, American partners will play in that next-generation Israeli aviation ecosystem, because the Lavi experience established a precedent. The F-35I experience deepened it, And the trajectory of Israel's indigenous capability development suggests that the next major Israeli aviation program will be even more domestically controlled, even more tightly held, and even more resistant to the kind of technology sharing arrangements that American officials would prefer. This is not comfortable for everyone. There are American defense officials who believe that Israel's insistence on maintaining full data sovereignty over its military systems creates real problems for alliance interoperability. If American and Israeli aircraft are operating together in a future conflict, and the Israeli systems are generating intelligence data that American commanders cannot access in real time, that creates potential gaps in the shared operational picture that could have consequences. There are also concerns, expressed carefully and diplomatically but expressed nonetheless, that some of the technologies Israel develops with American origin components, or with knowledge derived from American programs, could end up in places the United States would not want them. The Lavi cancellation was partly driven by exactly this concern. China's Chengdu J-10 fighter, which entered service with the People's Liberation Army Air Force in the early 2000s, bears certain design similarities to the Lavi that are not coincidental. During the 1990s, in the years after the Lavi was canceled, some of the engineers and some of the technology associated with the program moved in directions that American policymakers found deeply uncomfortable. Israel has worked to address those concerns over the years, tightening its export control regime, submitting military sales to the United States for advance review in certain categories, and generally managing the relationship with Washington carefully. But the underlying tension remains. Israel is a sovereign country making decisions about its own security. Those decisions do not always align perfectly with American preferences, and when they do not, the resolution is rarely simple. Now let's talk about what this means in practical terms for air power and for the future of aerial warfare, because that is where this story has its broadest implications. The F-35 program was built on a particular vision of how Allied air forces would operate in the future. That vision was fundamentally American-centric. American aircraft, American networks, American mission data, American logistics pipelines, all integrated into a system that the United States could monitor, update, and in extremis, constrain. The F-35I is a crack in that vision, not a catastrophic crack. The relationship between the United States and Israel remains deep and multidimensional in ways that go far beyond any single weapons program, but a crack nonetheless. And it is a crack that other countries are watching carefully. Because every ally and partner that operates American military equipment faces the same fundamental tension that Israel has navigated more aggressively than anyone else. They want the capability that American technology provides, but they also want the operational sovereignty that comes from controlling their own systems, their own data, their own tactical options. The more sophisticated a country's own defense industrial base, the more acutely that tension is felt. France has navigated it by maintaining its own entirely independent nuclear deterrent and its own Rafale fighter program, refusing to integrate into NATO's integrated military command structure for decades. Sweden developed the Gripen as a specifically Swedish solution to specifically Swedish operational requirements. The United Kingdom is a leading partner in the F-35 program and also a leading partner in GCAP, hedging between American interoperability and independent European capability. Israel's approach has been the most aggressive of all these, because Israel's threat environment is the most acute, and the consequences of strategic miscalculation are existential in a way that is not true for countries with the geographic depth and alliance structures that provide more margin for error. But Israel's approach is also producing something that goes beyond its immediate operational context. It is producing a model that says, you can operate the most advanced American platform ever built, you can be a close ally, you can maintain the relationship, and you can still insist on controlling the data that your systems generate, the intelligence your operations collect, and the technology direction of your next-generation programs. And that model is being studied by other countries that are thinking about their own long-term relationship with American military technology. The implications for American defense industrial planning are not trivial. The F-35 program was supposed to generate a massive, sustained export revenue stream for Lockheed Martin and for the broader American defense ecosystem, and it has. The program has been a commercial success by most measures. But if Israel's approach to the F-35I becomes a template, if future allied customers insist on the same level of integration rights, the same data sovereignty protections, the same ability to modify and customize in ways that are opaque to the manufacturer and the American government, then the strategic calculus of the export fighter business becomes considerably more complicated. Let's go deeper into the technical dimension, because the specifics of what Israel has actually done with the Adir are genuinely fascinating from an engineering standpoint, and they reveal why the data question is so important. The F-35 is built around a concept called sensor fusion. The aircraft carries multiple sensors simultaneously: an advanced active electronically scanned array radar, an electro-optical targeting system, a distributed aperture system that uses 6 infrared cameras mounted around the aircraft to give the pilot a 360-degree view, a radar warning receiver, electronic support measures. Each of these sensors generates data. The power of the F-35 is that all of that data is fused together into a single integrated picture that the pilot sees through the helmet-mounted display system. The helmet is not just a head-up display. It is a full surround view system that allows the pilot to look through the floor of the aircraft, look behind the aircraft, see threats, see friendly forces, see targets, all overlaid in a coherent tactical picture that no previous generation of fighter pilot ever had. Now imagine replacing or augmenting key elements of that sensor suite with Israeli-developed systems: the electronic support measures that listen for radar emissions, the systems that characterize and identify those emissions as specific threat types, the algorithms that determine how to respond to those threats, whether to maneuver, to deploy countermeasures, to engage with weapons, or to simply note and record for future analysis. When those systems are Israeli, the data they generate is Israeli, and the specific threat characterization data that an Israeli ESM system builds up over hundreds of operational missions against real adversaries in real environments is among the most valuable intelligence in existence. Think about what that data actually represents. Every time an Adir flies a mission near Syrian air defense systems, Iranian-operated radar systems, or the electronic order of battle that Hezbollah and other non-state actors have assembled with Iranian help, the Israeli ESM systems are collecting. They are recording the pulse repetition frequency, the scan rate, the frequency agility patterns, the specific electronic fingerprint of every radar that pings them. Over time, across hundreds of missions, that collection builds into an extraordinarily detailed picture of exactly how the adversary's air defense network operates, what its limitations are, where its gaps are, and how to defeat it. That picture is what Israel's mission data files are built on, and those mission data files, loaded into the Adir before every mission, are what give Israeli pilots the confidence to fly into environments that would be considerably more dangerous without that accumulated intelligence. The United States has its own mission data files for the F-35, built on American intelligence collection. But American intelligence collection against the specific radars and specific configurations being used by Iran-aligned forces in Syria and Lebanon is not as current or as detailed as Israeli intelligence collection against those same systems. Because Israel is there, flying those missions, every week. The American intelligence community has enormous resources and extraordinary capabilities, but there is no substitute for operational experience in the actual threat environment. Israel has that experience, and the data it generates from that experience is, in a very real sense, Israel's most valuable military asset after the pilots themselves. Now layer on top of this the question of the next-generation program that Israel is developing. Because the sixth-generation aviation challenge is fundamentally about surviving and operating effectively in a world where adversaries have acquired sophisticated air defense systems, where electronic warfare is pervasive and complex, where the electromagnetic spectrum is contested, and where stealth alone is no longer a guarantee of survivability. China's development of the J-20 stealth fighter and the apparent development of additional stealth platforms, Russia's Su-57, whatever its actual capabilities may be, the spread of advanced long-range air defense systems like the S-400 to more and more countries, the development of hypersonic weapons that compress decision timelines to near zero. All of these trends are pointing toward an air warfare environment in the 2030s and 2040s that is categorically more challenging than anything that existed when the F-35 was designed. Israel's response to that challenge has several components that are publicly visible and almost certainly more components that are not. On the visible side, the investment in unmanned systems is the most significant. Israel's operational experience with armed drones goes back further than almost any other country. The Heron TP, a large, high-altitude, long-endurance unmanned aerial vehicle, is a sophisticated intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform with strike capability. The smaller tactical systems, like the Skylark and the Orbiter family, provide persistent coverage at the battalion and brigade level. And the loitering munition family, from the Harop through to more recent developments, represents a capability to conduct precision strikes against time-sensitive targets at extended range without risking a pilot. But the future that Israel's defense thinkers are designing toward is not just more drones. It is a fundamentally different conception of what an air force does and how it does it. The term that keeps appearing in Israeli military literature and in the public statements of Israeli defense officials is decision superiority. The idea that the side that processes information faster, makes decisions faster, and translates those decisions into actions faster will win, regardless of the individual performance characteristics of any specific platform. This is a concept that the United States Air Force also talks about extensively. But Israel's version of it is shaped by a specific operational context that gives it a different flavor. Israel's version of decision superiority is not primarily about strategic competition with a peer adversary across vast oceanic distances. It is about the ability to identify a weapons convoy moving through Syria at 2 in the morning, confirm the intelligence, make a decision, and strike before that convoy reaches its destination, all in a timeline measured in minutes. And doing that repeatedly, consistently, night after night, against an adversary that is actively adapting and trying to make itself harder to find and harder to hit. That operational tempo, sustained over years, has forced Israel to develop artificial intelligence-assisted target identification, automated intelligence processing, and human-machine collaboration frameworks that are genuinely on the cutting edge of what is possible. Some of these capabilities have been acknowledged publicly. The Israeli military has spoken about AI-assisted target identification in the context of its operations in Gaza. The ethical and operational questions those acknowledgments raise are real and serious, and beyond the scope of this particular story. But the underlying technological capability, the ability to process enormous amounts of sensor data, identify objects of interest, and present decision-ready information to human operators at machine speed, is central to where Israel sees the future of air warfare going. And it is a capability that, again, is built on Israeli data, Israeli algorithms, Israeli operational experience, and is not something that Israel is sharing in its full technical depth with anyone else. Now let's talk about the geopolitical dimension more directly. Because the Israeli program's relationship with the United States is not simply a story of a junior partner pushing back against a senior partner. It is a story that has to be understood in the context of the broader Middle East strategic environment and the ways in which that environment has been changing in ways that make Israel's aviation capabilities even more central to regional stability. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. That normalization process created new possibilities for security cooperation between Israel and Arab states that share concerns about Iranian regional aggression. The UAE, for example, was simultaneously pursuing a purchase of F-35 aircraft from the United States. That purchase became entangled with American concerns about UAE technology sharing with China, and with Israeli concerns about maintaining the qualitative military edge that American law requires the United States to preserve in Israel's favor. The interplay between those different concerns, American worries about China, Israeli concerns about the qualitative edge, Arab desires for advanced American technology, created a diplomatic puzzle that has still not been fully resolved. But it highlighted something important about how Israel's aviation capabilities function in the geopolitical space. Israel's advanced aircraft and Israeli-developed technologies are themselves strategic assets in diplomatic negotiations. The Israelis understand this clearly. When Israel has unique capabilities, when it has systems and data that other countries want, that gives Israel leverage. Leverage in negotiations with the United States. Leverage in conversations with Arab states that want security guarantees. Leverage in discussions with European partners about intelligence sharing and counterterrorism cooperation. The decision to maintain tight control over the Adir's unique capabilities and over the data those capabilities generate is therefore not just an operational security decision. It is a strategic decision about how Israel positions itself in a complex regional and global environment where its size and its geography would otherwise leave it with few cards to play. A country of 9 million people, surrounded by adversaries, dependent on international trade, and sitting on a piece of land roughly the size of New Jersey, does not have many natural sources of strategic leverage. Military technological superiority is the most important one it has, and it guards that superiority accordingly. This brings us to a question that is worth sitting with for a moment. Is Israel right to do this? And the answer is not simple. From a pure national interest perspective, yes, absolutely. Israel's approach to maintaining control over its military technological capabilities is rational, coherent, and effective. It has produced a level of air power sophistication that is genuinely disproportionate to Israel's size and resources, and it has given Israel operational options that no other country in its geographic position could have. From an alliance management perspective, it creates friction, not friction that is destroying the American-Israeli relationship, which is deeply rooted and resilient, but friction that requires constant management, and that occasionally produces real disputes about specific programs, specific sales, specific technology flows. From a broader international perspective, Israel's model raises questions that the international community is increasingly wrestling with. As more countries develop sophisticated indigenous defense technologies, as AI-driven military capabilities spread, as the tools of advanced warfare become more accessible to more actors, the norms around technology sharing, export controls, and alliance interoperability are going to come under increasing pressure. Israel is not creating those pressures, but it is navigating them in a way that other countries are watching and in some cases trying to emulate. Now let's bring this forward to what is actually happening right now, in the current moment, and what the near-term future of Israeli air power looks like. The Israeli Air Force is currently operating 3 squadrons of F-35I Adir aircraft, with plans for additional procurement that would bring the total to over 50 aircraft. Those aircraft have been used operationally. The Israeli military has confirmed, without providing specifics, that the F-35I has conducted combat operations. What those operations were, where they took place, what was struck, and what the aircraft systems collected in the process is classified. But given the context of the campaign between the wars and the persistent Israeli air operations over Syria and elsewhere, the operational picture is reasonably clear even without the official confirmation. Beyond the Adir, Israel is continuing to operate an upgraded fleet of F-15 aircraft, designated the F-15I Ra'am, and more recently the F-15IA, with advanced upgrades including new radar systems, electronic warfare improvements, and enhanced networking capabilities. The F-15 is a different kind of platform than the F-35. It is not a stealth aircraft, but in the Israeli configuration, with Israeli electronic warfare systems and Israeli weapons, it is an extraordinarily capable long-range strike platform that can carry a much heavier weapon load than the F-35. The combination of F-35I for penetrating defended airspace and F-15IA for heavy strike once penetration has been achieved is a powerful operational pairing. And it is a pairing that the Israelis have designed deliberately because they are thinking about specific targets at specific ranges with specific defenses, and they are building the capability to defeat those defenses and reach those targets. The most significant target set in the Israeli strategic calculus is, of course, Iran's nuclear program. The distances involved in a potential Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities are extreme by any measure. The Natanz enrichment facility, the Fordow facility, buried deep underground near Qom, the Arak heavy water reactor. These are targets that are hundreds of miles from Israeli territory, protected by the most sophisticated air defense systems Iran has been able to acquire or develop, including Russian-supplied S-300 batteries and Iranian-developed Bavar 373 systems. Planning for potential operations against those targets has been a constant feature of Israeli Air Force planning for decades, and the aviation capabilities that Israel has been building, the F-35I's stealth and sensor capabilities, the F-15IA's range and payload, the unmanned systems that could suppress air defenses ahead of a manned strike package, the precision weapons capable of penetrating hardened underground facilities, all of these elements fit into a coherent operational concept aimed at maintaining the option to act independently if diplomatic and economic pressure fail to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. The United States has its own plans for Iranian nuclear facilities, and those plans involve capabilities that dwarf anything Israel can bring to bear. The B-2 stealth bomber carrying the massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb, is the American solution to hardened underground targets. Israel does not have a B-2. Israel does not have a massive ordnance penetrator. What Israel has is a smaller, more agile, more operationally sophisticated aviation force that has to solve a much harder targeting problem with the resources it actually has, rather than the resources it would like to have. And solving that problem has driven Israeli aviation development in directions that are genuinely innovative and that have produced capabilities that, in their specific operational context, may actually be more advanced than anything the United States has in the same envelope. Not because Israel has more money, not because Israel has more engineers, but because Israel has more urgency and more operational experience than any other air force in the world. That urgency is the mother of invention. It has been so for the entire history of Israeli aviation, going back to the improvised aircraft of Israel's War of Independence in 1948, through the stunning success of the preemptive strike that destroyed 3 Arab air forces on the ground in 1967, through the painful lessons of 1973, through the extraordinary operation at Entebbe, through the strike on the Iraqi Osirak nuclear reactor in 1981, through the strike on the Syrian Al-Kibar nuclear facility in 2007, which was conducted by F-15 and F-16 aircraft using methods and tactics that stunned intelligence analysts when the full picture eventually emerged. That history of doing more with less, of finding creative solutions to problems that conventional military wisdom said were unsolvable, of accepting risk in service of operational necessity, is baked into the culture of Israeli aviation in a way that does not translate easily onto a briefing slide. And it is part of why the data that Israel's Air Force generates from its operations is so valuable. It is not just technical data, it is cultural data. It is the accumulated knowledge of what it takes to actually execute these missions in the real world, against real defenses, with real consequences for failure. The final question this story raises is where it all goes from here. The United States and Israel are in the early stages of discussions about future aviation cooperation that will shape both countries' air forces for decades. The NGAD program in the United States is encountering significant cost and schedule challenges. The program is genuinely expensive, even by the extraordinary standards of American defense procurement. Some analysts have suggested that the United States may end up relying more heavily on unmanned collaborative combat aircraft and less heavily on a new manned 6th-generation platform than originally planned. If that happens, the operational experience and technological foundation that Israel has built in unmanned systems becomes even more relevant. Israel has things to teach, and Israel will demand value in return for what it teaches. The question of what that value looks like, what concessions or capabilities the United States would offer to gain deeper access to Israel's operational data and system architectures, is a negotiation that is ongoing and that will continue for years. Meanwhile, Israel is watching the development of other regional air forces with careful attention. Saudi Arabia is pursuing advanced aviation capabilities. The UAE's F-35 aspirations, however complicated by American concerns, reflect a broader Gulf state desire for independent air power. Iran is developing its own unmanned systems at a pace that Israeli planners find concerning. Turkey, a nominal NATO ally but an increasingly independent strategic actor, has developed its own Bayraktar TB2 drone, which has proven remarkably effective in multiple conflicts, and is developing the Khan 5th-generation fighter. The Middle East air power landscape of 2030 will look significantly different from the landscape of today. Israel is planning for that landscape with a thoroughness and a seriousness of purpose that reflects exactly how much is at stake. The aircraft Israel builds, buys, and modifies over the next decade will not just be military tools. They will be the physical embodiment of the core strategic insight that has guided Israeli defense policy since 1973. You cannot outsource your survival. You cannot depend entirely on someone else's goodwill for your ability to defend yourself. You must build, domestically, the capabilities that allow you to act when you must act, with or without anyone else's permission, and with or without anyone else's data. That is why they will not share the data. That is why the Adir carries systems that Lockheed Martin cannot fully examine. That is why the mission computers that Israel's pilots fly with contain intelligence that American analysts would very much like to see. And that is why the next Israeli fighter program, whatever form it ultimately takes, will be built on the same principle. What is ours is ours. Not because Israel is ungrateful for American support, and not because the alliance is hollow, but because the lesson of the Lavi was written in the language of existential necessity, and that lesson does not expire. The pilots